Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Sorry about that. I was muted, folks. We've got I had COVID last week, so I'm set up at home. So apologies for that, folks. But yeah, hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller, is out of town this weekend, but Ben Job is taking his place in the studio. Thank you, Ben.
Yes, thanks
for
including me.
Yeah, we are still broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, Department of Education workers win big. Republicans are coming after your Social Security, even more child labor in Alabama. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number. The line is still open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online. We are now streaming on Twitch, so you can find us there now. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining member of the program, make a one-time donation, or buy our stickers, then you can go to our website. That's tvlr.fm, tvlr.fm/store, and tvlr.fm/donate. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And if you're a member of a union, definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. That will really help us out. We're always, some locals are falling on and falling off. So the more folks that we get on, the more stability and sustainability that we will have. And the more reliably we'll be able to bring you the Valley Labor Report every week. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first segment today. That's going to be Last Week in Southern Labor. That is a segment that we do every week, mostly where we tell you what happened in the labor movement in the South. We pull the information from Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird, which compiles all this information for the entire United States. So if you want to see what's going on outside of the South, then subscribe to his newsletter. That's whogetsthebird.substack.com. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into new organizing through December the 11th. 150 workers who do HVAC manufacturing for Seasons 4 in Douglasville, Georgia, are organizing with UA Local 72. 104 drivers for Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits in Farmers Branch, Texas, are organizing with Teamsters Local 745. 80 Starbucks workers at 4 stores, including in Flower Mound, Texas, are joining the Starbucks Workers United movement. 80 warehouse workers for wood products manufacturer Patrick Industries in Decatur, Alabama, are organizing with RWDSU. Shout out to any of those folks who may be hearing us live on the radio right now. Definitely feel free to call in. 29 dancers at the Texas Ballet Theater in Fort Worth, Texas, are organizing with AGMA, as are 19 more dancers at Ballet Memphis. 12 more school bus drivers in Amarillo, Texas for the DS bus lines are joining Teamsters Local 577, and 10 drivers from Maytag Aircraft in Fort Stewart, Georgia are joining AFGE Local 1922. We had one big win, which involved 349 workers involved in the PGA Tour telecasting, which is based in St. Augustine, Florida. They voted 135 to 52 to join the IBEW. In strikes and bargaining, Marty Walsh is now apparently stepping in to try to resolve the 200-day, 1,000-member UAW Local 807 and 180 case New Holland strike in Burlington, Iowa, and Racine, Wisconsin. But Warrior Matt UMWA strikers in Brookwood, Alabama, have been out 3 times as long with no end in sight. In rural Sampson County, North Carolina, school bus drivers called out in protest after teachers, but no other staff got raises. We love to see that. Teachers in St. Johns County, Florida, went red for ed at a school board meeting after having rejected a $1,200 raise. The current average salary is under $47,000. Spirit Airlines matched Delta's 34% wage offer to the Airline Pilots Association. That's pretty that's pretty good. The United Airlines CEO tried to speak to some picketing pilots and was only able to see a wall of their backs. We love to see that solidarity. In politics and legislation, the railroaders' fight for paid sick days is not over yet, as dozens of members of Congress, led by Bernie Sanders and Jamal Bowman, push for Biden to take executive action to grant 7 paid sick days to railroad workers under an executive order covering federal contractors from 2015 that Obama created to exempt rail carriers. In the meantime, SMART and BLET conducted a dozen or so rallies across the country this past Tuesday, which are likely to be geared towards winning this executive order. The Teamsters won a huge pension victory this week, with the Biden administration announcing $36 billion to avert pension cuts for 350,000 Teamsters under the failing Central States Pension Fund. Organizing against these pension cuts were part of the big grassroots movement that groups like Teamsters for a Democratic Union have built off of over the past decade, often at odds, not just with the companies and the federal government, but union leadership as well. Probably not a coincidence that a week after shoving a contract down the throat of some 30,000 Teamsters, Biden moves money around to make good by the union. And finally, in internal union politics, Starbucks Workers United turned a year old today with nearly 300 union stores and over 7,000 union baristas. And with that, let's go ahead and take our first break. On the other side, we're going to be talking to Cathie McQuiston. She is the Deputy General Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees, and she's going to be talking to us about a settlement that the union has won from the Department of Education. Folks, stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136 out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, but he is out of town. Ben Job is filling in for him, and I am broadcasting from home because I had COVID last week. So we are just all sorts of not normal this week, but we appreciate your time and attention and patience. If you've got anything to add to the program, you can give us a call or send us a text. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. It's 844-899-8857. We appreciate your contributions in the Facebook and the YouTube chat. And I did see the that stuff about the Kansas oil spill. Infinite Content is saying in the YouTube chat. That is insane stuff. We are loving to see the Double Down Starbucks strike across the country. Over 100 different stores is my understanding. So Really love to see stuff like that. Workers coming together. Great stuff. So our first guest this morning is going to be Cathie McQuiston. She is Deputy General Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees. Cathie, thank you for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Good morning. Glad to be here.
Good morning. Good morning. So you're here to talk to us about a big win for workers at the Department of Education. But let's start with this. Can you tell us what the Department of Education does? Why do we not want to, let's say, abolish it?
Sure. I mean, the Department of Education basically, as a broad matter, sets education policy for the U.S. The two largest segments of employees are in federal student aid. And so obviously those folks deal with loans for education and dealing with the contractors who service those student loans. And the other largest single group is the Office of Civil Rights. So those employees investigate and enforce civil rights, Title IX, those kind of things, investigate individual schools or complaints.
And that sounds like pretty important work, right? We definitely need those to keep the education system running.
Sure, absolutely. The employees are very dedicated, especially in the Office of Civil Rights. You have a lot of attorneys who have left law firms and private practice because they believe in the work of enforcing civil rights and protections for students in our schools. So yes, it is very important.
And this, the lawsuit, the settlement that y'all were able to win, it stems from actions under the Trump administration and Secretary of Education Betty DeVos. But before we get to those specific actions, can you talk to us about some of the other ways that she, through her position as Secretary of Education, kind of sabotaged public education? You know, that's all. We spoke on the phone yesterday about how a lot of times Republicans will come in and they will appoint people to head agencies that they literally want to destroy. They literally want to abolish these agencies. And, you know, she comes from a long line of school privatizers in Michigan. So what were some of the ways that she tried to sabotage public education from her position that aren't implicated in this settlement that you're going to be talking about shortly?
Well, I think she, as you mentioned, she has a long, well-documented history of hating public education and of hating unions from her time before she was confirmed as secretary. So she, elevated from a policy standpoint a lot of the religious education and elevating those policies that were important to her, which, overarching was the weakening of the department itself and its oversight authority, whether it was a civil rights or what have you. And that was a key reason that she tried to get rid of the union, because the protections we had in our contract, as well as our employees, were, as I mentioned earlier, very dedicated civil servants to the cause and believe in the right to public education in this country. And in order to expedite her policies, implementing her policies, she had to get rid of any barriers. And one of the major barriers to her sort of master plan was to get rid of the union.
And so that's a really good segue into what we're here to talk about today. Y'all were able to win a big settlement. And so a lot of that has to do with an imposed contract that, was in violation of the law. And that was really geared at destroying the union. So walk us through some of that backstory.
Sure. So the agency and the union had been started contract negotiations in late 2017, early 2018. And The agency never actually met with us to bargain a single time. And instead of March in 2018 said that the union was bargaining in bad faith, even though, again, as I mentioned, we had never met and we had offered to meet. We had dates scheduled, and then the agency unilaterally canceled that bargaining. They wrote what we refer to as an edict, a totally management authored contract that essentially waived all of our statutory rights under labor law and imposed that contract. And so that single incident led to a series of additional violations that occurred over the next approximately 3 years. And that's how we ended up with the litigation was surrounding that core issue.
And presumably they had some sort of, what was their reasoning for their saying that we have this ability to just impose unilaterally a contract on y'all?
They claimed falsely that it was the union was refusing to bargain with them, which, you know, when the Federal Labor Relations Authority is the federal sector version of the NLRB, and they investigated those allegations and found them to be without merit. And so that's why they issued complaints against the department. It was a total of 14 unfair labor practice complaints over the 3-year period, starting with their unlawful imposition of the contract and further unlawful actions taken after they were trying to rely on their unlawful contract to do things further on. So those were also found to be violations.
And so let's talk about some of those things, because you mentioned that the imposed contract at the Department of Education really served as a tool, as a guidepost for the Trump administration, the way that they acted towards federal employees across the rest of across other agencies. And so what were some of those, what were some of the violations that stemmed from that imposed contract, and how was that replicated across the federal government?
Well, to be clear for everyone about what the further actions were. So that contract was imposed in March of 2018, and then in May of 2018, just before Memorial Day weekend, the Trump administration issued a series of executive orders that applied government-wide, that severely limited the rights of unions in the federal government. And so the contract, you know, being issued about 2 or 3 months right before that action took place, government-wide, the actions the Department of Education took were actually more harsh than what ended up being imposed government-wide. You know, some examples of that is that they removed all of our employees who were members from dues deduction membership, union membership. The federal government is an open shop, so no one has to belong to the union, but the agency over a 2-year period systematically dropped people from their union membership through payroll deduction without their knowledge or consent. They expelled us from our union offices that we had bargained the right to have on agency facilities so that we had a location to meet with employees that we represent. And they also revoked our what's called official time, which is time under the federal labor law that unions have to do representation work. And so the department gave our union representatives no time at all of any kind for years. So this was a strategic, large-scale plan to bust the union at the Department of Education to get us out of the way so DeVos could have a clear path without objection or opposition to implementing her anti-public education policies.
Right. And so what are the ways that these things that were taken from workers and you know, from the union, what are the ways that actually helps the agency helps the agency execute its mission, right? Because the one of the stations that we're on is a conservative radio station. And so there is, among some of our audience, there's a certain amount of anti-union, anti-government inclination. And so when they're hearing, I can just hear some objections from folks in the audience thinking that the ability for union or for workers to represent each other in disputes with management, that's just something in the way of the agency executing its mission. You know, all of these things that they got rid of are just roadblocks that are, you know, but actually, you know, it's our view that having these things does actually help the agency execute its mission and serve the people of the United States. And so walk us through why not only would workers at the Department of Education not want these things removed, but why would it be that you know, just a random citizen in the United States that relies on the Department of Education for this or that thing, why would it be that they would want a functioning and active and powerful union for the workers there?
Well, I think as a general matter, all the union is the voice of the workers. It's not a third party entity, right? The leadership, it's a democratic organization. The leadership of the union is elected from among the workers at the Department of Education. And so these are the people that know what's going on the ground. Whereas higher level people, Betsy DeVos and people like that sitting in Washington, don't necessarily know, because the Department of Education actually has offices across the country. So not everyone is sitting in Washington. They're sitting in Dallas or Atlanta or Denver, Chicago, places like that, doing this work. And I think that, again, I mentioned part of their mission is a civil rights mission. It's protecting the rights of students. And those, from the conservative angle, those rights can include, for example, religious expression and prohibitions on expressions of religious expression, and not being able to discriminate against people for those expressions. And also for, you know, student loans don't have political lines that I'm aware of, certainly. And so, especially as this administration works to forgive a lot of the loans, if that's able to move forward, I mean, that's a huge undertaking, a lot of behind the scenes things that have to go on, and we want it to go smoothly and we want it to go well. And if whatever's happens is allowed to go forward, then you want it to be smooth and you want it done right. And the way to do that is to hear directly from the workers about what that'll take. The union isn't just necessarily about disputes with management. It's also about, the federal government has a long history of what's called labor management partnership, where the leaderships of the unions and worker representatives sit down with leadership in an agency and, you know, talk about issues, resolve them informally to avoid the kind of litigation we ended up here with in you know, the last 3 years until the Biden administration came in.
Right. Yes, that's definitely that's definitely an important part, and and I think that in the federal government, the labor and management cooperation, it even makes a lot even more sense than it does in the private sector, because the dynamics between labor and management, I think, really are at least a little bit different in the federal government. I remember when I was hired on, actually, part of my hiring panel was also coworkers. It wasn't just management that interviewed me. It was other coworkers, and that's something that I would like to actually formalize in our contract. I think that's just something that has come up over the years at my agency, but I'd really like the next time we sit down and negotiate our contract to get that formalized, because I think that that's a really cool thing for the workers to be able to be involved in the bringing on of new employees. And so this settlement, what is it, and how is that going to help the workers at the Department of Education moving forward?
Well, the settlement does a lot of things because there were a lot of cases involved. Institutionally, for the union, it reinstates us to the place we were entitled, you know, had bargained to be in. as far as reinstating our offices. It reinstates the employees to dues deduction. It pays us back the monies we're owed for the time. And given the number of employees and the amount of time, that money is over $500,000 we're owed. It also requires bargaining over things that the agency had refused to bargain over. So telework, Betsy DeVos had done a number of reorganizations, which by law, the agency was required to bargain the impact and implementation of those reorganizations with us, which they refused to do during DeVos's tenure. So they have to now bargain those with us, because sometimes they put, for example, employees in new jobs that they don't have any training for, they don't have any background in, and it's sort of setting people up to fail. And the union, when it bargains, it calls for appropriate training and things like that to avoid those kind of problems for individual people. So there were some individual grievances against employees where they were denied leave and things that they were entitled to. So basically the settlement, which was very wide ranging, addressed sort of a host of issues that I've just summarized.
Right. Cathie, really appreciate your time this morning. Is there anything else that you feel like our audience ought to know about this issue?
No, I think we've covered most of it. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss it and talk about Department of Education's work.
Cathie McQuiston is Deputy General Counsel for the American Federation of Government Employees. They are the largest federal employee union, representing over 700,000 federal employees across the United States. Cathie, thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and get right to our next guest then. Our next guest is going to be David Dayen. David Dayen is the executive editor at the American Prospect. And he is going to be talking to us about the Republicans taking control of the United States House of Representatives and what that's going to mean for working people in across the United States. So David, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So like I said, executive editor of the American Prospect, and you have been working on, you've been working on what it's going to mean for the U.S. House to be controlled by Republicans, and that's going to happen here in just a couple of weeks. And so give us a top line of what that's going to mean for working people in your estimation.
Right. Well, I mean, the main work product of this Republican Congress is probably going to be hundreds of investigations into the Biden administration. So we should be clear that legislation is probably not their main goal. However, there are going to be these moments where a variety of bills sort of have to pass. You have to fund the government. You have to make sure that the country can borrow to pay its bills. And in these moments are opportunities for Republicans to force through their ideological agenda. And they have not been shy about saying that that is what they want to do. They have said very specifically that in two instances, one, legislation to fund the government, it looks like we're going to get an omnibus bill that will take us to September of 2023. But after that, that legislation could be held hostage by Republicans for the purpose of making large budget cuts or tax cuts or whatever it is they want. And the other piece of legislation is known as the debt limit. So what this is, as I said, is the nation's borrowing. It has a set limit of a certain number, and that number can be extended by Congress. If it isn't, then we default on our debt. And obviously, it's kind of a ridiculous piece of legislation. We don't really need it. When we set budgets and when we pass legislation that spends money, we should essentially deem at that point that we're going to pay for that. However, that's not what we do. We put together this thing called the debt limit, and in the past, this has been used by Republicans as sort of a hostage-taking opportunity to cut spending, and particularly with an eye on things like Social Security and Medicare. And in the run-up to the new Republican Congress, members all the way on up to Kevin McCarthy, who's likely to become Speaker, they have said, we are going to use the debt limit, which expires in the spring of 2023. We're going to use that as leverage to get cuts to Social Security and Medicare. I mean, they've said it out loud. They've not been shy about this in any way.
Cuts to Social Security and Medicare, like you said, they've said it out loud and they've made these commitments publicly. Before we get into that, what are some of the other things that they're are there other programs that they have, in the public taken aim at and made clear that these are going to be some of the things that's going to be on, they'll have their targets set on as bargaining chips whenever they have this leverage come, September 2023 for the budget or spring of 2023 for the debt ceiling?
Yeah, I think the big one is the money that was given in the Inflation Reduction Act to the IRS. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was $80 billion that was earmarked to the IRS. The IRS has been gutted over the last couple decades, mostly under Republican control of Congress, to the point that they can't do basic customer service anymore. I mean, you can't get a human being on the phone at the IRS, for example. And audits of wealthy people have essentially gone by the wayside at the IRS. Wealthy people, corporations, those audits almost don't happen anymore. And this money was intended to ensure that tax that is owed is collected and that people have a half decent experience dealing with the tax system. And that has been targeted heavily by Republicans, both in the election and since the election. So we're definitely going to see efforts to use that leverage to roll back all of that money from the IRS.
Well, now, I don't understand why they would want to take money from the IRS, because I thought they liked law enforcement. That was
right. The tax police are definitely not being funded under a Republican government, nor are the white collar police. Right. I mean, we don't see a lot of money put to corporate crime either.
Well, and that's something that we talk about quite a lot on the program, is that anytime there's a law or a quote unquote law enforcement agency, which if you wanted to stretch the term, the IRS really is a law enforcement agency, right? Anytime there's a quote unquote law enforcement agency like the IRS or like OSHA, like the NLRB, like MSHA, all of these programs that really are, in a certain sense, law enforcement, anytime that those help working people or target bosses and rich people, the Republicans are against law enforcement.
And by the way, I believe the number is that the NLRB has been operating under the same budget for the last 13 years.
Yes.
They have not gotten any kind of raise, even though the population has grown and inflation has grown. Similar with budgets like the SEC, and some of the other ones you were talking about, OSHA. I mean, I think the standard is that OSHA can only, under its current budget, can only monitor a workplace something like every 70 years. I mean, like that's how meager a budget that OSHA has. So I mean, this is the kinds of things that historically Republicans don't want to fund. And they're going to have that opportunity to look at domestic spending in that fashion and with an eye towards cutting back whatever gains were made in the last 2 years. But of course, the military budget is a magic budget that doesn't have to be cut in any way. We have seen over the last 2 years the budget requests from the president on the military be exceeded by billions and billions of dollars, mostly because Republicans in the Senate, which obviously in a 60-vote environment you need Republicans in the Senate, they have forced those numbers up and up, and that's only going to continue. Pretty soon we're going to have a $1 trillion annual military budget, which is just incredible.
And it's amazing how disconnected the rhetoric is on that issue, especially in particular, because the NDAA was, I believe it was just passed, or it was just passed in one of the houses, and
just passed. Yeah,
and like you said, higher than Biden requested. You know, tens
by
of
about
billions,
45 billion, I believe, was the number that was higher.
Tens of billions of dollars more than it was last year. And just last week, we had Tommy Tuberville going on the right-wing radio circuit talking about how weak Biden is on the military, and how we need to strengthen the military, and how this budget isn't going to be enough for them or whatever. And it's amazing. It really is amazing how and contrasting that with these other agencies like the IRS, like OSHA, like MSHA, like the NLRB, all of these things that need funding, and how there's never, sorry, I had COVID last week. That's why I'm broadcasting from home. But why there's never enough for those agencies, but there's similarly, it's, there's never enough money to actually give those agencies, but no matter how much money we give to the military, it's never enough. There's always more to be given to them.
And what's the rhetoric from, particularly from Republicans, is that we have runaway spending in Washington, that there's this runaway bureaucracy, that these agencies aren't spending effectively. There's all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse. And yet, the budgets that these agencies are forced to do their work, their very expansive mission under, pale in comparison to the sprawling nature of the military industrial complex. It's really incredible.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing all this coming down the pike. You know, I know that you're like a journalist, and this is really your beat, but I mean, somebody even like a layman like me down here in Alabama, don't have like a fancy professional media gig, right? I can see this coming down the pike. So do the Democrats see this?
I mean, there was an opportunity in this lame duck session, which is the last chance for Democrats who hold a majority in both houses of Congress to do something, particularly about the debt limit. So as you remember, they passed the American Rescue Plan, passed the Inflation Reduction Act with just Democrats, right? That was, they used this thing called reconciliation, which is sort of an end around the filibuster. And they used that to, pass a bunch of tax credits for clean energy, this change to the system for pharmaceuticals, what that is going to actually bargain for prescription drug prices, all of those things, the money for the IRS, all of that was done just with Democrats on a party line vote. They could have done the same thing to raise the debt limit. The debt limit has been used before in this reconciliation process. It would have taken a little bit of time on the Senate floor, but what they could have done is raise it to a number that was so big that we would never hear about it again and would never threaten the full faith and credit of the U.S. government in a hostage-taking situation, essentially, where Republicans say, we're going to default on the national debt if you don't, make these changes that we want. We could have ended that. We could have ended that essentially forever. We could have raised the debt limit to $111 billion. We could have just made it never a problem again. And there was just no urgency to do that, even though Republicans were saying very openly, this is what we're going to do. We like having this debt limit because we're going to use it to get our priorities done, even though we don't control the presidency, even though we don't control the Senate. So I think this was a huge missed opportunity. Democrats are sleepwalking into a crisis that we're going to see at the beginning of next year. And Democrats are pretty happy now. They feel like they had a midterm that was, not as bad as they thought going into it. They kept the Senate. They increased their numbers in the Senate. They won some things at the state level. The House is very evenly divided. But now we're going to have this impasse next year, and mark my words, this is going to go down to the 11th hour before they come up with a solution. Now, in the past, Republicans have had because of the filibuster, they have had a way to do this before. Sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it's gone down to the wire, and in 2011. It led to something called sequestration, which cut those discretionary budgets even further, just mass indiscriminate cuts to various things like food safety and worker safety, workplace conditions. All of those kinds of things, inspections were cut in after 2011. I don't want to see that happen again, but that is the road that we're heading down.
I just don't understand why is it that what is their reasoning for not doing something about the debt limit right now?
The debt limit historically is a vote that members of Congress don't want to take. And so they put it off until they have to. If you're raising the debt limit to a big number, you could get an ad that says, ex-senator voted to increase this amount of borrowing to trillions of dollars. What a horrible thing. I've never seen that actually work in a political campaign. Right. But that fear is palpable in Washington. And, it's a 50 vote majority in the Senate. And so you have to get the likes of Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin to agree to do this maneuver to take this hostage taking out of the hands. Now, obviously, we saw Sinema move to become an independent during this time. So, they may not have had all 50 votes to move in that direction, but I don't even think they tried. I mean, it was just sort of an assumption that Manchin and Sinema wouldn't be for this, rather than sitting them down with, someone in the financial world who understands what a catastrophe it would be to default on the nation's debt, and have them say, look, this is what's going to play out. And you have an opportunity here to not have this happen. And that's the responsible thing to do for the country, because this could be catastrophic from an economic standpoint. If you allow this default, the world relies on U.S. Treasury bonds as the most stable instrument for debt in the entire world. And if that comes into question, it could spark a global catastrophe. So this is a really dangerous game that Republicans are playing here, and Democrats aren't paying enough attention to what the consequences could be.
And it's a game that they're playing with the express purpose that they're using that as a bargaining chip expressly to hurt people. I mean, that's the thing that, either way, they are hurting people. Really,
and it's
really
Social
badly.
Security and Medicare, right? Which are these, these bedrock systems to give people a little bit of dignity in retirement and make sure that they have the health care they need. Republicans never want to take these things head on, right? They clearly think that these are programs that need to be smaller, but they don't want to do it all on their own. When they had the control of the government, they didn't cut Social Security and Medicare. They want to get Democrats bought into it so they can deflect the political blame when older people get their checks and they're smaller, or they can't get enough as much Medicare and they have to pay more out of pocket. So that is the game here. They want to use the debt limit to create a bipartisan, grand bargain whereby these things are cut and nobody can blame anybody for it. So like that's part of the game here.
So, David, they say that the things that they're going to say, the reasoning is twofold. Is one, on the Social Security and Medicare front, as a silo, they would say these programs are going bankrupt. Let's tackle that.
Right.
These programs are going bankrupt. They're going to go bankrupt in X number of years. What does that mean when they say these programs are going to go bankrupt?
Right. So, I mean, we know how Social Security and Medicare work. Workers pay into a fund that pays for the retirement checks to go out for others. Essentially, you paid into this your entire life, and then you're entitled to get these benefits after you retire. So that trust fund has gone up and down over the years. We are in a situation where there are more retirees relative to workers, and those programs are set to be in a position where that trust fund will be depleted. However, Social Security, because of the paying in and going out, is set up for to pay benefits, some level of benefits forever. Maybe not at 100%. But there are very easy ways to deal with the gap, the long run gap in Social Security. The biggest way is the fact that only a certain percentage of people's income, up to a certain point, if you make over $160,000 a year, that dollar over $160,000, it's something like that. I don't know the exact number, but over $160,000, your Social Security benefits aren't taxed. Right? So there's this gap. And if you just scrap that cap, we'd be in a much better situation. Now, in the past, about 90% of all payroll was covered by the Social Security benefits. It was taxed. Now it's more like 80%. And that's because of inequality. That's because of inequality, right? I mean, as incomes go higher and higher, someone making $160,000 a year and LeBron James pay the same amount of Social Security tax, because after 160, none of that gets taxed. And that's the problem, is that there are more and more people making large sums of money, and that's a larger segment of our overall payroll. And so if you would just figure out a way, and it would be very easy, it's a one-line bill, to scrap that cap on Social Security payroll taxes, then this gap would magically go away. But of course, that would harm rich people, right? So that is not the way that we think about these things. Rather, it's talked about, oh, we got to cut benefits because we can't afford the benefits. There are plenty of options that do involve no cuts to benefits that would get us into balance, actuarial balance on Social Security. And similar things are true of Medicare too. The biggest being the fact that we can negotiate on the price of prescription drugs, as we're going to do, but that's a little bit in the future. If we would just accelerate that, that would take down the amount of money that Medicare is paying out, and thereby extend the life of the Medicare Trust Fund.
The other thing that they use to attack these programs are, they've got the one where these programs in and of themselves, they're going bankrupt. And I think that, you've gone through why that's really, really, really disingenuous. But the other thing that they're going to say is that these programs, as a part of the federal budget, are deleterious to the United States. They're just, we're spending too much money. We are too far in debt. Look, number big. That's bad. Why? What would you say to that?
I mean, that's an abstract way of saying what they don't want to say fully, which is we think poor people should have a worse experience in their retirement. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying without saying it, right? I mean, they just say, "Oh, we're spending too much." Well, what are your priorities? What should we be spending on? No, we're just spending too much. But it doesn't mean that the military gets less. Doesn't mean that large tax deductions for things like mortgage interest, which go disproportionately to the wealthy. It doesn't mean we cut those back. Doesn't mean we cut other tax breaks back for corporations, for very rich people, on estates, after inheritance taxes, things like that. It means that we cut these programs that are generally for poor people. Programs for the poor or are poor programs is one statement that I've often seen made. The big lobbyists out there are covering corporations. They're covering very, very wealthy people. There aren't many lobbyists for the poor. And so those programs get targeted ultimately when you make an abstract argument like we're spending too much.
Right. Somebody said in the chat, or we could simply revert back to 1950s levels of taxation. We could make America great again, something like that.
That's right. Yeah, they wanted to bring back the 50s. Why not bring back the tax rates too?
Right. Which were, just to make it clear for the audience, something like 90% on the top marginal tax rate in the 50s.
Top marginal.
Yeah.
Tax rate. It doesn't mean 90% of all your money is taken by the federal government. It means that over a certain level, we're going to tax at that rate. Right.
And so, why are I guess you said it, why are Republicans so dead set on killing these programs? It's because that they want to make the experiences of the poor worse, even though Social Security and Medicare really helps their key demographic more than anybody else. Is the elderly.
I mean the other part of that is that Social Security and Medicare, which have been in place, Social Security since the 1930s, Medicare since the 1960s, are examples of government being very successful in achieving its goals of broadly shared prosperity, protecting the general welfare. Republicans look at successful programs and say, we don't want to give people too many ideas. We don't want to let them know that maybe we could afford free college for people. We don't want to let them know that maybe we could, if we do Medicare and it's successful for the elderly, that maybe we can do it for everybody. We don't want to get people comfortable with the idea that government is a solution to people's problems. So we need to mess up those programs so that it furthers our argument that government is not equipped to handle the challenges of the 21st century. So I think there's an ideological aspect to this that they don't want to see successful programs thrive.
And we do have a caller on the line, just so you are aware.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and bring him on.
All right, 1 second.
And while we're waiting for that caller,
hey,
David,
I commented on a channel or on a post on YouTube earlier and talked about how there was a slow in production on Mazda.
How there was how there was a slowing production at Mazda.
Well, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but there was a slow in production on Mazda, and they were having a backup on everything that was going on. And I'm down on the ground floor. I'm not going to say where I'm at, but I would say that it all has to do with management, man. I've been in the trucking industry for a long time, and everything that's slowed down, everything that's a problem, it all has to do with management. All we do is we come out and do our jobs, and everybody else comes out and does their job. And if there's anything that slows anything down, management.
Yeah,
those extra workers that are just there that aren't really.
That's very interesting.
So if you got a minute, I'll get a little nitty gritty with you. Right now there's a I'm gonna try to say this as politically correct as I can. So one of our suppliers right now, they've got guys over in their warehouse that are standing around for like 4-5 hours at a time. They're getting paid off of Toyota, and it's because they don't have the racks to put all the equipment on to fill up their trailers. So we come over there and they say, "Hey, why are you bringing an empty trailer?" And we say, "Well, you know, it's what they sent us with. And then, you know, it's a chain reaction, right? So they don't have the racks. They can't put all their equipment on it. Well, we come over there, we don't have the racks. They can't send the rest of their stuff back to Japan. And it's like, it built up, man. From what I understand, we've got around like, I don't know, probably like 10 trailers sitting over there of racks that are not being unloaded because there's either a shortage of forklift drivers, B, there's things being slowed down with their computer systems, or there's something else like us drivers not having what we need, like check sheets, paperwork, trailers not being in the yard anywhere to be found. There's so much, a truck being broke down. There's so much going on. It's insane, man.
Sounds like a real supply chain disaster. Now, how long has this been going on?
Did you hear that? How long has this been going on?
So I would say I started around beginning of summer, and this has been an ongoing issue since around the beginning of summer. There's times where I came in there at 7 a.m. and I didn't work, like actually run a truck. You know what I mean? Like I was sitting in the yard just idling, wasting my time, wasting their time, just getting. I call it bullshit money, you know. Just wasting away.
You're an
didn't
employee,
work
so you're
for like
getting
3 hours. I come in at 7, didn't work till like 10 a.m. And it's gotten better. Like I'll say that it's gotten better because I work when I come in, but there's times where like the yard passes aren't there. There's all this paperwork that it has to be there and it's not there. There's racks that aren't ready. There's trailers that aren't ready. Like there's all this slowdown, and me, I just want to go fast. Get me done, let me get done, go home. That's all I care about. I want to get done, go home. That's it. I want to do my job, run my routes, and go home. That's it. And there's all this riffraff. There's managers arguing. That's all. The managers, hell, they want to argue with us. If they hadn't got their fight out with each other, they just want to take it out on us truck drivers. And then nowadays, the truck drivers, some of us have gotten kind of irritable with each other, and it's all comes down to managers, man. I mean, we know that you have to have peace to be able to pull all that freight around and not, kill somebody. I mean, you get hot-headed and you're pulling 80,000 pounds of freight, man. You can't do that. So it's gotten where it's like we'll be people be cutting people off in the yard. People, the camaraderie of truck driving isn't the same here as it is when I was out on the road.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh no, go ahead, David.
Anything.
Oh, I was just going to say that. I mean, that sounds like a bad situation. In where I'm at in California, if you look at the port truckers,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. They're not even set employees. So if they're sitting around, they're not getting paid as independent contractors. They don't get paid for the times when they're sitting waiting for things to unload or
you're fine,
or anything
man.
like that.
Yeah, I can hear you good now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's what you're talking about is a bad situation, but.
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We're gonna Ben, tell the caller that we're gonna have to let him go. We're having
we have a good connection.
Yeah, we're having trouble getting back to you. But if you have a comment or something for the caller, I can get it through to him.
Yeah, we'll just tell him we'll have to let him go.
You're fine.
We'll have to tell him to call back.
Well, thank you for your call. But we're gonna move on with our segment. But thank you for your input, my friend.
Hey, yeah, I'm glad I could key you in.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.
Have a good one, man.
You too as well.
Sorry about the tech difficulties there, David. We're weren't able to get our audio from the Zoom to the person that called in, but that was a fellow that actually commented on one of our shows segments about Mazda locally, and so I'm glad that
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, long haul trucking is, an industry that was deregulated in the 1980s, and we heard during the pandemic, right? Oh, there's a trucker shortage. That's the big problem, and it's not a trucker shortage; it's a shortage of decent paying jobs in that industry. And we've written about that, and it's an ongoing problem. And of course, now the trucking industry. We actually just had a story just last week. The trucking industry is ground zero for surveillance in this economy. They get in there. They have these electronic data logs, ostensibly for safety reasons, but now it's a way for the boss to monitor your every move in the truck. We've heard situations where the dispatch is telling the trucker, get up and go and get driving because you just finished your break. We know it because we see the data logs. You just finished your break 2 minutes ago, so you better get started and get driving. It is there's almost like a panopticon of surveillance that's going on from the headquarters to the truckers out in the field, and it's the beginning of something a little bit creepy in our economy writ large.
No kidding. And so, we'll wrap up with going back to Social Security and Medicare and the attacks that those are under. What are, I guess it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen, but what would be your predictions going into, the debt ceiling limit expiring in the spring, the budget in the fall? How can Democrats stop these attacks on either Social Security and Medicare and the benefits that those give to the elderly population, or the entire global economy? One of those it looks like those are going to be under attack. How can Democrats stop them?
The good news is that all of these things we're talking about that Republicans want to do are very unpopular, right? And they don't want to be tagged as solely responsible for these things happening. They don't want to be the people who took away your Social Security, who took away your Medicare. They want to make it a grand bargain between Democrats and Republicans, so nobody's responsible. So if Democrats hold the line and force Republicans to be the ones to pull that trigger, responsible, for a debt default, somebody's going to blink. Right. And it's possible it will be Republicans. I mean, the problem for Republicans in the House to manage this strategy is that they have a very thin majority. So they might not even have majority support to do this kind of stuff because they're relying on some moderates, relative moderates. I mean, we're talking about Republicans here, but relative moderates in places that Biden won, in places like New York and California. Those hold the majority in their hands. And so it is going to be difficult for Republicans to sustain this, especially if Democrats are out there every day pounding this message that Republicans are the ones coming after your Social Security, coming after your Medicare, and Republicans are the ones that are threatening to take down the global economy if we don't give them these things. So there's going to be very tense negotiations and fights around these little moments of leverage opportunities, and Democrats are going to have to hold strong and make the message and put it out there in public of what's going on.
Do Democrats have the fortitude to do that?
I mean, we'll find out. We'll find out. President Biden has said, we're not touching Social Security. We're not touching Medicare. So he has said that publicly. Now, he could have secured that in the lame duck session by just taking the debt limit off the table. But I think Democrats think they can win this fight in the court of public opinion. We'll see if they can do it.
David Dayen, executive editor at the American Prospect. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this morning.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. So, yeah, like I said, we appreciate him taking the time to talk to us. Definitely check out the American Prospect. You can find it at prospect.org. And folks, and caller, definitely send us a text message. And Ben, if you could jot down that person's phone number so that we can, so that I can call them after the show, because those problems definitely sound like something that that could be organized around. So if you're interested in talking to the local Teamsters, talking to the local Machinist Union, getting in touch with a local union, we can see about helping you fix some of those issues here at Mazda in Huntsville. So we're going to take a break really quick. And on the other side, Adam has a message for us about a local educator. So make sure you stay tuned, folks. We will be right back. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBEW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBEW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBEW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at AFGE.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host Adam Keller is out of town. I've got COVID, so I'm broadcasting at home, and Ben Job is holding down the fort back at the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. In my lap, I have our foster dog. If anybody wants a cute little kitty puppy, you can DM the show.
All right, you probably can hear me now, and we may be live again.
Okay.
OBS just had a mild
yeah.
issue there.
Yeah, looks like we're back. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
look,
folks.
yeah, we're good over here now.
Okay.
Sorry about the
Appreciate
downtime, y'all.
Yeah, so definitely check out the American Prospect. They do really good work, really good reporting. Appreciate y'all sticking with us through the technical difficulties. And just once again, for that driver at Mazda here locally that called, definitely reach out to the show and we can put you in touch with one of the local unions if you'd like to begin organizing. Yeah, infinite content streams acting up. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us in the chat. Champagne Humanista says, wow, okay, loving the facial hair. Appreciate it, Champagne Humanista. And infinite content says, ironically, the minimum wage hasn't risen in the past 13 years either. Indeed. So I mentioned on the other side of the break before we left that Adam has recorded a quick segment for us about a local educator who is being forced into an early retirement if nothing happens. So Ben, let's play that from Adam really quick to let the folks know what's going on at Lee High School, I believe, here in Huntsville.
Yes, indeed. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to make folks aware of a situation involving a fellow worker here in Huntsville. In this case, a fantastic educator at Lee High School in Huntsville City. A local parent named Dave Anderson started a petition on change.org. I happened to see it this week, and I wanted to pass it along to all of you guys so you could be aware. The petition states, quote, Michelle Sisson, the creative writing magnet instructor at Lee High School for 13 years, is facing the daunting decision of being forced to choose early retirement. To say Ms. Sisson has been an asset to this community is an understatement. She has produced more valedictorians in her magnet than any other magnet. She is the only nationally board certified teacher at Lee High School. And she also has her master's in instructional leadership. The petition then quotes one of Ms. Sisson's former students, Colby Meeks. Colby is not only an alumnus of Lee's Creative Writing Magnet program, but is attending Harvard University, where they serve as the 2023 poetry editor for the Harvard Advocate. Colby states, Ms. Sisson and the environment she cultivated and protected in the Creative Writing Magnet allowed me to learn to be a writer, yes, but also learn to be a leader and a mentor for those younger than myself. Her care in the moments I wanted to give up, and her sharing in my pride when I felt like I was on top of the world, are an undeniably huge factor in my getting to where I am today, as an academic, as a poet, and as a person. It's quite the testimony from a former student. You see, Ms. Sisson takes great pride in the Creative Writing Magnet program. she took on the program in addition to her English core classes. Juggling the commitments to both courses has been increasingly difficult. Quoting again from the petition, Ms. Sisson is the only magnet teacher at Lee High School who also teaches core classes. The other magnet teachers teach electives along with their magnet classes. Ms. Sisson has to teach 4 different creative writing magnet classes in one block with 21 students ranging from 9th through 12th grade. This situation effectively puts the creative writing magnet program into a schoolhouse type situation. The other magnet teachers who do not teach core classes have at least 2 blocks to teach their magnet students. So Huntsville City Schools is treating the creative writing magnet as an elective, while Ms. Sisson's main job is English 9. Further intensifying the situation, Ms. Sisson has worked through cancer, COVID, and now Friedreich's ataxia. She wants to and is fully capable to work through ataxia, but Huntsville City Schools is refusing to meet her ADA accommodations of smaller class sizes, ensuring the safety of her students and herself. Huntsville City Schools is refusing to address this issue, and it boils down to money. They are using state funds to pay Ms. Sisson's salary and treat her magnet class as an elective. So Huntsville City Schools has gotten a free magnet teacher out of her without any increase for 13 and a half years. Michelle Sisson is a fantastic teacher for the creative writing magnet. She continually changes and shapes student lives in so many ways. She's offered many solutions to the Huntsville City Schools that would benefit the students while making her classroom safe for all involved. Focusing on possibly teaching an elective for EL students whose needs are not currently being met at Lee High School. This would be a situation similar to her magnet colleagues in that EL could be her elective class commitment. Time is critically of the essence at this 11th hour. Ms. Sisson started the process of reaching out to numerous administrators in Huntsville City Schools and the Board of Education in October 2021. Concerned parents joined the effort in the fall of 2022 when it was clear Huntsville City Schools did not care to help Ms. Sisson. We have exhausted all available avenues and resources. The overwhelming lack of response and action from Huntsville City Schools administrators and Board of Education has brought this to critical mass for Ms. Sisson as she contemplates this difficult decision to retire before January 2023. Please sign this petition and email Huntsville City Schools Board of Education and superintendent at hsv-k12.org. So that's the petition. And let me add that it's come to my attention that as Huntsville City Schools ignores this great teacher's reasonable request for accommodations, which would in fact just be to treat her similar to other magnet teachers, as the district ignores her request, as the district ignores parent and community outcry, they are at this very time adding yet another 6-figure salary, big wig job to central office. That's right, folks. They're actually bringing back the chief of staff job, which was a do-nothing, hatchet man, bureaucrat type job created by Casey Wardensky and wisely phased out in 2017 by then Superintendent Matt Aiken. He saw at the time it was a waste of money, but apparently it's not anymore. This job will apparently have an upper salary range of $200,000. Now that's more than a lot of superintendents across the state of Alabama make. So you want me to believe you cannot accommodate a loyal, hardworking, dedicated educator in your school system, but you can afford another 6-figure salary at central office. Seems pretty absurd to me. But of course, this isn't the first time. I can think of plenty of instances where central office jobs got some priority over the rank and file. I can remember an instance a couple years ago, or a few years back now, where a couple folks already making 6 figures were given 5-figure raises. Meanwhile, I had multiple salary grievances waiting to be resolved. Sometimes when I think about the way folks with a little bit of power in that place have behaved over the years, it makes me sick to my stomach. Ms. Sisson, know that I and the Valley Labor Report stand in solidarity with you and your struggle. We urge all of our listeners to sign the petition, to email their Huntsville School Board member, and to email Superintendent Christy Finley, whose email is superintendent@hsv-k12.org. Thanks and solidarity, y'all.
The from the Huntsville City School Board, Huntsville City schools, just really, really amazing to be creating a 6-figure salary job at the same time that they are refusing to give one teacher reasonable ADA accommodations. Just really, really, really gross stuff. But we're going to be wrapping up here on the radio. We're going to be going into overtime shortly, where Adam has prepared several different segments for us. And I am also going to be hitting on some late breaking news from yesterday about more child labor. I mean, the story just keeps getting worse. More child labor in Alabama. Previously, it was reported that at least two Hyundai suppliers were found to have been utilizing child labor. And now that number has risen up to 4, with 6 additional suppliers being investigated for potentially using child labor at their facilities. So this situation just continues to get worse. And the silence from the Alabama Attorney General continues to be deafening. Remember, we've been chronicling the lack of action and the lack of interest from the Alabama Attorney General since this began, since the story broke, at least back in July. And still to this day, the Alabama Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Alabama, has not said anything publicly, about children being employed in manufacturing environments in the state of Alabama. It's just absurd. It's just absurd. But like I said, we're going to be wrapping up, and we're going to continue that conversation in overtime. Don't forget about our striking UMWA sisters and brothers in Brookwood. You can support them at paypal.me/UMWA Strike Pantry. Obed Edom, done up in Jade Like Green Waters, their new album. Check out their new album on Bandcamp. Obed Edom is Ben Job's music project. So definitely check that out. You can leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. You can support us or buy our merch on our website, TVLR.fm. Become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. And and next week we are doing our first ever best of show. So reminder, folks, please do give us your ideas for best ofs. Submit it to us in an email, DM us on Facebook, Twitter, stuff like that. And with that, we'll see you pre-tape next week. Alrighty, folks. We are off the radio now. In overtime. Appreciate everybody staying and hanging out with us. Infinite Content says in the chat, do we need to see who is funding the Alabama Attorney General's campaign? How much money are these auto manufacturers donating to him? That's a good question. I'm not sure. For some reason, I haven't actually thought to look that up, but it's definitely a good question. And really, it's possible. I mean, who knows? Because it's not like he's faced a primary opponent in a long time, and it's not like he's faced a real general election opponent ever. So, I really don't know that he needs to raise just a whole lot of money. It could just be that he just loves, the powerful. It really could be as simple as that. I'm not sure. But yeah, so we're in overtime now, and we are going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back to talk about that child labor situation, and then we'll play what Adam has got for you. So stay tuned, folks. We will be right back with overtime on the Valley Labor Report.
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear us. We're living through 2 deaths of OBS. Tragic, but I think we are good. Probably just give it a minute, see if it's
okay.
Yeah, there we go. I think YouTube's catching up.
All right. Hey, there we go. Okay.
Hello.
All right. So, folks, we are now in overtime. We are off of FM radio. Appreciate you staying and hanging out with us. Adam has some really good segments lined up for you today. So I appreciate him doing that. He had prepared those segments because my fiance and I were going to be going to a wedding today, but we both got COVID. So unfortunately, not going to be able to go to the wedding, but that's no reason to deprive you of this great content. He has some commentary on Alabama's political engagement, which I think is going to be really good. Has a tribute to Mike Davis and Stoughton Lind, who we've both taken a lot from, in particular Stoughton Lind. I'm not as familiar with Mike Davis, but Stoughton Lind has really been pivotal on, my view of unionism and stuff like that. He's also got a December labor history roundup for you. So really good stuff. But I did want to just touch, I haven't prepared a really big segment on child labor, and probably will do something about it in the new year. I'm actually working on a piece for More Perfect Union on the child labor situation here in Alabama. And so maybe we'll play that when we come back from the new year if it's ready. But I wanted to talk to you about it just kind of off the cuff, because the news broke yesterday. And so that's one of the reasons that I haven't been able to prepare a big segment on it. But it's just astounding that it really is astounding that this is happening in Alabama today. And news broke less than 24 hours ago.
Man, I haven't heard it, and I'm scared. I'm scared to hear it.
It's like there's nothing in, there's like no, you're if you listen to like talk radio, they're not going to be talking about this at all. And so what the latest is just basically that there's more suppliers in the Hyundai Motor Company supply chain that have been caught using child labor. So previously there were two. There was one outside of Montgomery in Laverne, and there was one outside of Mobile. That was SL Alabama. Smart Alabama was outside of Montgomery. Well, now there is a plant owned by Huashin America Corp, which is a supplier to Hyundai, in the South Alabama town of Greenville, and a plant owned by Agent Industrial Company in the East Alabama town of Cassetta. Both of these have been revealed to have been utilizing child labor, children under the age of 16 in manufacturing environments. I mean, again, just like the plants outside of Mobile and outside of Montgomery, these are manufacturing environments.
I work at a hospital. We see a lot of these people as patients, because machines are dangerous.
Yes,
they cut off fingers, they crush arms, and I mean they're built to make cars. And if you get in the way, you're not lasting very long.
And then state and federal agencies, according to Reuters, and I really recommend folks check out this Reuters piece. The title is "A Reuters Special Report: Child Workers Found Throughout Hyundai Kia Supply Chain in Alabama." The reporters are Mika Rosenberg, Christina Cook, and Joshua Schneier. Really great reporting. They interviewed over 100 current and former workers and managers and community members, just really extensive reporting on this situation. So I haven't even been able to fully digest everything in this report, but definitely recommend checking it out. And in addition to those four confirmed Hyundai suppliers in Alabama utilizing child labor, state and federal authorities are now probing whether kids have worked at as many as half a dozen additional manufacturers throughout the automaker supply chain in Alabama. So this is clearly a systemic issue. Like, this is not just, if it was just the Montgomery plant, which was the first thing to come out, if it was just these folks, maybe you could say, okay, this is a rogue manager at the Laverne plant who's going crazy, and it's just him or her that needs to be held accountable. But clearly, this is an entire systemic utilization of children in the United States of America in the year of our Lord 2022 here in Alabama. And so there has to be criminal liability for the executives of this company. If there's not, then what else would criminal liability be for? I mean, if somebody like you or I, Ben, or Adam, were to put children in the amount of danger that these executives are willingly putting them through on a day-to-day basis, we would be in jail.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
And the idea that these people are just able to go
what other laws
scot-free.
are they breaking if they're having children work in these?
Yeah.
If they're having children work in these very dangerous plants, there's got to be some other stuff that and I just wonder about the documentation status of some of them, like how they, whether they're a victim of trafficking. Like I wonder a lot about these workers. Well, they shouldn't be workers, but they're workers now, unfortunately. But yeah, man, they're most likely they're impoverished people that are already at the will of some bad systems. So it's tragic to hear that.
Yeah, really tragic. Most of these people are undocumented as far as I can tell. They're either undocumented or they have like a precarious documentation that's dependent on their employer. They've been able to secure fake IDs and stuff like that. And but the reporters that have talked to some of these workers, they've said like, oh yeah, I worked next to children, and it was obvious that they were children. But the ability for workers in these situations, which is why right-wing capitalists like the system of immigration that we have in this country as it is right now. That is why they like for undocumented immigrants to be demonized. They like all this rhetoric, anti-immigrant rhetoric. But it's why you're never going to see any sort of real solution, because they want the border to be porous, not because they want free labor with all of the rights of citizenship that entails, but they want precarious labor. They want undocumented immigrants who, if they get too uppity, they can deport at a moment's notice. They don't want people coming here with the full freedom and rights that are associated with citizenship. And that's why you don't see anything that's actually like something like open borders. You see this porous, closed border that allows people to come in on a contingent basis, whether they're documented or not, that can be sent back at the whim of the boss.
So they can be exploited.
And this is the result. This is the result of that system. You're going to have 12, 13, 14-year-old children working in facilities with amputation hazards. And you're going to have the people who are supposed to be protecting them, people like the Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, not doing anything. It's just
how many reports is it going to take before we see? I'm curious, because it's crazy.
It's really, really disgusting. So I wanted to give that to you. Definitely, again, check out their report. Reuters investigates undocumented and underage. And the title is Child Workers Found Throughout Hyundai Kia Supply Chain in Alabama. With that, we are going to go to Adam's, what Adam has prepared for overtime today. Ben, thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for hanging out with me in the studio.
Yeah. Thank you guys for weathering the storm through two crashes, which are pretty rare. Usually the whole thing doesn't fall out.
Yeah.
But thank you guys.
So with that, let's go ahead and play what Adam's prepped for y'all.
Indeed.
Hey, good morning, folks. This is the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio show. Really appreciate you tuning in. My name is Adam Keller, and I want to thank you for spending a little bit of time this morning looking at news, commentary, and analysis by and for working class people here in the South. So, over the past few weeks, we've hosted conversations about the state of the Alabama Democratic Party and taking a look at this year's election results. I wanted to start there and examine our conditions. I wrote a couple segments about Alabama's political engagement, and we're going to start by looking at the conditions we're facing here in Alabama. So we've had some conversations about the Alabama Democrats. We've looked at the election. We also had an illuminating conversation with Mark Dudzik about the U.S. Labor Party effort during the 1990s. It's in that context I want to mention a new study on Alabama political engagement and talk further about the state of Alabama electoral politics for working class people. About a month before the election, a new study from Wallet Hub ranked Alabama voters as among the least politically engaged in the country. Per an Alabama Political Reporter article by Jacob Holmes, quote, the study found Alabama to rank 48th, above only West Virginia and Arkansas. The study weighed 10 metrics to determine political engagement, including the percentage of registered voters in the 2020 election, percentage of electorate that actually voted in the 2018 midterms, percentage of electorate who actually voted in the 2020 presidential election, total political contributions per adult, and other factors. The study found a strong correlation between a state's level of education and political engagement. Alabama ranked 45 in education compared to 48 in political engagement. The study also took into account voter access policies and voter education. Alabama does not allow for mail-in voting, curbside voting, or early voting. Allison Johnston, an associate professor at Oregon State University, said that education and income correlate highly with voter turnout along with ease of voting. So they also mentioned in the study, in regards to income, that only 47.1% of American voters with a family income of $10,000 and under voted in the 2020 election. And now that was the record-breaking presidential election that saw voter turnout nationally above 66%. Alternatively, a much higher 84.8% of American voters with a family income of $150,000 or more voted in the 2020 election. While income is not a perfect substitute for class, it does support a broader theme we see with the middle and upper classes voting at higher rates than the working class. By and large, workers are less likely to vote than their bosses and landlords. A few other relevant statistics for Alabama. The total population is about 65% white and about 27% black. Folks 25 and older with at least a bachelor's degree or higher equals about 26%. Folks 65 and older made up about 17.6% of the population, which I actually thought would be higher. About 16% of Alabamians are considered to be in poverty. Per capita income is $28,934, and the median household income is about $52,000, which means a hell of a lot of people are close to poverty. So with that in mind, let's consider last month's election in Alabama. 61.5% of Alabama's more than 3.6 million registered voters did not vote. That's less than 4 in 10 participating, and that's just those who are registered, not including those not registered or not eligible. Looking at the top of the ballot with the governor's race, Kay Ivey won in a landslide against someone who could, hardly be considered a serious contender. But ultimately, Ivey only won 26% of registered voters, 24% of eligible adults, 18.7% of Alabama's overall population. I think it's a mistake to conflate the lopsided election results we saw as indicative of the state as a whole. The far right might claim a popular mandate, but the numbers don't completely bear that out. A majority of Alabamians did not participate, and as I referred to with the Wallet Hub study, that isn't unusual, even if 2022 was the lowest turnout in a few decades. For me personally, I voted, and I will always vote as long as I have the opportunity. But I do understand why so many opted out. As I mentioned, voting is more difficult in Alabama than in other states, and I shouldn't have to remind folks of our state's long, ugly history of disenfranchisement or the disproportionate impact of mass incarceration. People are trying to survive, busy with work, family, health, and they have to be informed about how and where to vote, and of course, have to have some motivating reason on why to vote. This election clearly did not motivate the masses in Alabama. It didn't help that many of the races were literally not competitive, as numerous candidates ran unopposed. I mean, hell, out of 26 offices on my ballot, only 7 even featured Democrats, and some of those were basically campaigns in name only. Just for reference, the Libertarians fielded 12 candidates. That's more than the Democrats if you're keeping up. There were more unopposed GOP candidates on my ballot than Democrats. That doesn't inspire much turnout, and we're just talking about the quantity of candidates, not even getting into the quality of the campaigns. Now, as we recently discussed on the show, the Alabama Democratic Party is not, and for years has not, been a viable opposition to one-party GOP rule and political domination from the right. A party that cannot field candidates for half the races, much less all of them, could hardly be considered functional. A party that does well to lose by less than 20 points statewide and in most districts could hardly be considered competitive. And those are just a couple of many symptoms of deeper issues. So, the party can't seem to field candidates, can't seem to raise money, can't seem to generate good press, can't seem to host regular meetings, can't seem to post on social media, can't seem to host online trainings, can't even seem to send regular emails, can't or won't. If we were to find out the Republicans have been secretly controlling the ADP over the past decade, how different would it actually look? Would it even be surprising given the results? It almost seems you have to try to be as bad as they've been. It would be kind of hilarious if we weren't all the butt of the joke. Now, maybe you think I'm being too critical, but the majority of Alabama effectively does not have representation, does not have any legit opposition to the far right, and has not for years. My entire adult life, sadly. And if that's not worthy of political criticism, I don't know what is. Which is all separate from the bigger picture that the National Democratic Party is ultimately a party of capital and empire, not the working class. But I'm going to leave that alone for now and return to Alabama. If you know much about Alabama politics, you know that we have been a one-party state politically dominated by the right for most of our history, even if the party labels have changed over the years. We are living in the shadows of historic defeats of Alabama's working class, including the defeat of the turn-of-the-century populists and the unfinished work of Reconstruction and civil rights. The state has for most of its history been dominated by so-called big mules, the wealthy, elite, powerful interests that dominate our politics, our economy, and our society. And today, the Alabama Republican Party is happy to serve them and their interests with minimal opposition. And if everyday people, white and black, native and immigrant, gay and straight, if we cannot unite, we will continue the societal downward spiral of exploitation, oppression, and environmental collapse. So we've been taking a look at Alabama's political engagement, starting with examining our current conditions. I want to move now to look at what do we do next? How do we move forward? One thing that always comes through to me in the Alabama Democratic Party conversations I've observed and participated in is that neither of the two apparent main factions that have quarreled over the years seem all that interested in engaging labor, the left, or for that matter, most anyone under the age of 50. We've seen the last few election cycles under Worley, England, and Kelly that were total disasters by any metric. Obviously, in fairness, Kelly came after candidate qualifying this year, so it remains to be seen what will come from his leadership. But based on the conversations hosted on this show, there certainly seems to be a disconnect between leadership and many of the activists. I'm not alone in wanting an interracial working class movement that can shift the balance of power in our state. A movement carrying forward the torch of movements past. I think that's our best hope to address the multiple layers of crisis we're facing. We have to fight bigotry, oppression, and exploitation with love, justice, and solidarity. The working class is the majority and is the most diverse class. We need to be strong enough to not only win elections, but so much more. To the extent we need leaders, I want leaders who are of, by, and for the people. We need more democracy, not less, and I think an organized working class is how we get it. Now, when I say such things among Democrats, many of them look at me like I'm speaking a different language. And I guess in some ways, maybe we are. Which leads to the question of what should be done. How can the working class move forward politically in Alabama? Or can we? Some will reject electoral politics altogether, focusing on workplace and community organizing, mutual aid, and/or other efforts. I think there are essential ways to build people power, particularly with workplace unionization and organizing that are outside of political elections. We need that. We obviously are huge believers of that at the Valley Labor Report as a union show. We encourage everyone to start in their workplace. But should we completely abandon electoral politics? There are those who say we need a new independent working class party, a new labor party. I'm certainly intrigued by the idea of having our own political party of, by, and for the working class, and with a base of power in the unions. But there are drawbacks to account for and questions to answer with that strategy. How to overcome a political system designed to exclude third parties. How to reach the working class folks who do currently vote Democratic or even Republican while still activating new members, new voters. And to what extent is there support for such an effort inside the unions as of now? There are still others who would say we have no choice but to work inside the Democratic Party. That's where the numbers are, that's how the system is structured, that it's the easier or more likely pathway to building an opposition to one-party right-wing rule and making some gains for working class people. But there's certainly reasons to be skeptical about that pathway. And if you're not sure what those reasons are, I would encourage you to check out virtually any current labor issue now under a Democratic administration. There are no doubt smart, dedicated folks already pursuing all of these strategies. There's pros and cons to each approach. I think we've seen examples of all of these strategies and more throughout history and throughout different states and regions. And I think those case studies are worth examining so that we can get a clearer picture of what activists and organizers in Alabama should be doing moving forward. Now, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I'm going to lean towards an all of the above approach for now. I think we have to strengthen our coalitions and networks of solidarity and collaboration, strengthen our relationships, unite the organizers and activists across the state, link up the folks who are already doing this sort of stuff, even if it is in different arenas or through differing strategies. We have to reach that 60+% of non-voters and expand beyond the Alabama Democratic Party's usual ceiling of 35 to 40% of the 35 to 40% of Alabamians who are actually voting. But at the same time, we still have to organize amongst the workers who are consistently voting. we have to reach as many Alabama workers as possible, some of whom are being reached by Democrats, some of whom are being reached by Republicans, and most of whom are not really being reached by either. I reckon that starts by connecting folks that are already trying in their own ways and building out from there our capacity to reach more workers. I'm wondering if we need a grassroots effort to establish a coalition that can develop a political program. A coalition around a worker-first, progressive platform and strategic framework. Then look for candidates who will run on a coordinated slate on this political program, whether that's inside or outside the ADP, or maybe some combination depending on the circumstances. In my assessment, there's a small but important left labor social justice base out there in Alabama, inside and outside of the Alabama Democratic Party, that has the potential to bring together such a coalition. A coalition that can not only develop a common campaign platform, but a real program of outreach and education while connecting existing movements and organizers, lifting up the good solidarity work already being done across the state, and highlighting current struggles in need of solidarity. Whilst it's an imperfect measurement of this base that I'm describing, it's worth considering that over 100 Alabamians showed up to the Troublemaker School in October. Based on that alone, I estimate a core of the most activated and militant worker organizers in the state to at least be a few hundred strong. Could that be the basis for a new coalition? Based on 2016 and 2020 primary election results, there's a solid block of about 75,000 Bernie voters who right now have no voice in Alabama politics or leadership. Could that be a pool of sympathetic workers? Not only a pool of potential supporters, but importantly, potential activists and organizers who can, in turn, grow the numbers. While Alabama's union membership is way too low, we do have higher density than most states considered to be in the South, with estimated membership ranging from 6% up to 10% of the workforce. Of course, there's varying levels of organization and militancy there. But these unions have networks, have resources, have PACs. Some of them, maybe most of them, might be too conservative to do anything outside the box. But maybe not all of them. Could the established unions provide a base of support for such an effort? To be sure, these are really small numbers compared to the overall electorate. But we also know that organizing is a means towards addition and multiplication. Could that be the foundation for a militant minority that could advance an Alabama labor-first political movement? Or am I just talking out of my rear end? I'm really curious what our listeners think, as many of you would be among the most militant and organized workers in the state. I certainly won't pretend to have all the answers or the right prescription. I do think it's important that we have these conversations, and my goal is mostly to facilitate more dialogue among the folks who could be considered the militant minority. Right here in Alabama, there are some brilliant, courageous, justice-minded folks doing good work through their unions, their political organizations, their advocacy groups, and in the broader community. The more of those folks, the more y'all can put your heads together, the more solutions we can find to these pressing questions. For those of us committed to a better Alabama, whatever approach we take over the next 4 years, we got to keep organizing for positive change and interracial people power in spite of the Democrats and Republicans. We need to have more collaboration and build sustainable networks that can support people when they do organize for positive change. Typically, change comes from the bottom up. If If we can transform Alabama politics, it will be through the power of working class people coming together around our common interest. All right, folks, you're still listening to the Valley Labor Report. We are Alabama's only union talk radio program, and I'm really excited about this next conversation we have. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that we try to highlight folks inside of Alabama, folks particularly in the northern half of Alabama who are doing good work, whether that's inside a union or outside the unions. And that's what we're doing here today. I've got Rob Burton on the show, and I'm really excited for him to tell us a little bit about his organization, Sweet Alabama. So Rob, you mind introducing yourself and tell us how you got into activism and organizing?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Adam. I'm excited to be here talking with y'all today. So I guess a little bit about me. So I should note that I came from a family that was involved actually in investment banking.
Wow.
So I actually grew up in the top 1%.
Interesting.
Yeah, not your typical story that you're gonna hear on here when it
right. No, that's not what I expected.
So I should say I have something called cystic fibrosis, which is a chronic illness, and it predominantly affects my lungs and my pancreas. So my first 3 years, between I was born and I was 3, I was basically 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out of the hospital, and luckily the medicine for that has come a long way. And I had, because of that economic background, right, of my family, I had lived in a community that didn't have as much air pollution. I had all of the resources I needed for nutrition and healthcare and all of that stuff to put me in the position to have the kind of health I have now, which, I think a lot of folks who would have been born with CF back in the 80s didn't have those kind of opportunities. And so I'm in a much better position than most folks. But my dad worked on Wall Street. He did actually merging and acquisitions. So he helped large companies become larger companies. And I really got involved in the community first and foremost because of my cystic fibrosis. Just starting canvassing in 6th grade, organizing my 6th grade buddies to come to the fundraisers, the big walkathons, all that kinds of stuff. And my dad, after 9/11, lost his job, and he moved out to LA, and he became a really bad alcoholic and cocaine addict. And he ended up taking his life when I was in high school. And so that just kind of thrust me further into community work. Between that, my CF, I just knew that I wanted to be involved in addressing issues in our community. And I didn't have any kind of political analysis. So it was more like tutoring middle school kids and stuff like that. But I guess I went to UAB for college, and Birmingham's got some of the worst air pollution in the country. And that just kind of propelled me into a lot of environmental organizing, but specifically through a lens of what's called environmental ableism, which is not discussed very much. We often talk about racism and classism. We don't as much talk about the environmental ableism. So people like myself who have chronic illnesses that are disproportionately affected by that pollution. And that really, I think, is kind of my tie-in from an intersectional organizing position. And I know that, if I was born in more of a working class background, I'd realistically be dead, because of this disease. And so kind of being able to be involved in that intersection around environmental ableism, class, race, so forth. So that was kind of in college. And then I've been working for nonprofits doing organizing for the last 10 years at kind of that intersection around race, class, and class and environmental issues.
Wow. I mean, that's a hell of a story, honestly. And I've
I appreciate you sharing it with me, and I appreciate the journey that you've been on to get to this point. I think it says a lot about you that you're willing to kind of own that story and recognize some of the privileges that you had, in addition to some of the struggles that you've had, and how those have related with each other and have propelled you to try to get involved. I really respect that. And something that you mentioned about the air pollution that really resonated with me, because I've been learning more and more about that myself and trying to, come at it from a labor perspective, analyzing the environment and how it affects working class people. And I've been lucky enough to learn a little bit more in recent months, including from some folks down in your neck of the woods, GASP, for example, Panic, and some other organizations. And so, yeah, you're doing good work. I really appreciate that. And I think now's a good time for you to tell us about Sweet Alabama and your organization. What are y'all all about?
Absolutely. So I guess I should start by saying, so Sweet in itself, there were 7 of us who founded it in 2017. It's always been, a predominantly, the founders have always been predominantly Black women. And most of us live in the Birmingham area. And we created it because we realized that, in particular, being able to address these issues from that intersection with labor, there was not an organization really working truly from that class perspective in this work. So before I before I helped found Sweet, I did a lot around this intersection, but it was more related to agriculture. I think because of my own issues around with my lungs and that air pollution, looking at that through that lens when it comes to energy has always been something that I've had a big interest in. And so we founded that in 2017. And in particular, what we wanted to do was, when it comes to addressing energy, a lot of folks say, try and organize against the Public Service Commission, which is important, or do that kind of policy work. And what we really wanted to do was be able to address it on more of the community level, first and foremost. So so in Alabama, we don't just have the highest energy bills, residential energy bills. Like in Birmingham, we have the highest what's called energy burden. So percentage of income spent on that energy. And the reality is, the reason why we have such a high energy burden is not simply because of our high energy bills. It's because we have such a high poverty rate that folks' homes are so dilapidated that they're living in, that the amount of energy they're using because their houses are dilapidated is much higher than in most states.
Right.
The story of the South in general, right? And so how do we help? We have a lot of folks in our community that are either, that are trained as say plumbers or electricians that are maybe unemployed or underemployed. And how do we essentially help either organize folks in that situation or young folks who are interested in going into these technical fields and teach them how to do home energy retrofitting, which we look at as much more expansive as a typical environmental group. Most folks would look at that as purely about energy efficiency. But the problem with that is if your HVAC system, if your heating and cooling system for your house doesn't work, then trying to make your house more energy efficient doesn't mean anything, right?
Right.
You have to take a more holistic approach around what that means to help folks address their housing. And an average house uses about 3 times the amount of energy as your average car, right? So this is ability where we can decrease folks' energy bills by around 40%. That's 40% more of that money going to help folks, put food on their table, buy books for their kids when they're trying to go to school, you name it. but it also is a way for communities to build their own economies. If folks don't have control over the economies in their community, then all of that, that's the issue, right? That's the political issue. That's the economic issue. It's folks not having control of those economics in their community. So we can help folks begin to build their own community-owned businesses. That can be in collaboration with unions, or it could be separate. There's a lot of work in the country around unionized, worker-owned cooperative businesses.
Which we're a big fan of, obviously, on this show.
Exactly. And so that's kind of the route I think that we're moving towards as an organization, is how to use this work around housing and energy to be able to build like community-owned cooperative businesses and potentially unionized cooperative businesses.
I think that's so cool because you're doing a lot of things really at once. You're hitting a lot of areas at once. You're addressing, by reducing energy consumption, right? You're addressing climate change. You're putting money into people's pockets by reducing their bills, and then looking at a bigger picture of actually like growing wealth in a community from the bottom up. And I think those are the kinds of ideas we need to be working on, really. And so I think everything you just described about Sweet Alabama and what y'all have going on is very interesting to me. I think it's much needed. I'm not familiar with any organizations up in North Alabama necessarily that are doing exactly what y'all are doing down in the Birmingham area. So, who knows? Maybe someone listening is going to get some inspiration from this. I wanted to ask next, was there any specific projects or anything that y'all have that you're working on right now that you wanted to talk about, or is there anything maybe coming down the pike that you expect in 2023?
So I guess I can say two things. One, which is related to our programming. One, which is related to some policy work. Because ultimately, to address these issues that we just discussed, right, you need ultimately both. So the one is definitely around home energy retrofitting. We had originally put it mostly on pause during the beginning of the pandemic because we are going into people's homes. But we did restart that program this year, and we'll be just further extending and expanding that next year. So, the goal is there's kind of a two-pronged thing, right? One, which is being able to simply pay folks for their labor who want to be able to go into a home and retrofit it. The other is being able to train folks and essentially functioning as more of like a mutual aid program where we can go in. I have options for people who are going to do it DIY if they don't want anybody in their home. But the other is being able to actually train folks where we can, as one community member, it kind of told me, is like, if we could train folks en masse to do this, we could literally just kind of go down the block and just start retrofitting everybody's home like down in the week, So,
and that would be so amazing. And I think that's the kind of vision that we got to have. And what if we do that, right? I mean, that would be so life-changing for so many people.
Absolutely. So that's one way that people will be able to get involved, is kind of through that route. And the other, which is kind of more of our policy angle, which we got involved. We're supportive of something called the Gulf South for Green New Deal, which is a really extensive, expansive policy that includes a lot around labor, around how it relates to military and prison expenses, like you name it, it's in there. And so I do think the name holds a little bit of baggage to some people, which is a messaging conversation to have, but the policy itself is really comprehensive and beautiful.
I just learned about it. So I was in Houston a couple months ago for the Power Up Gulf Climate Summit. Awesome. And that's where I met some of the sisters and brothers with GASP and some of the other organizations, both in Alabama and elsewhere. And that's where I first learned about the Green New Deal for the Gulf South. And I think that's, it's very interesting because the Gulf South, we have some of our own unique challenges down here. in many senses of that word, but including the environment itself and the just the sheer location of petrochemicals and other polluters in our environment.
Right. So I think we got into a conversation essentially in 2020, our organization with 7 others, and it was basically, well, what would need to be happen to fund something like this, right? Because ultimately, this is not just a federal thing, right? This requires conversations on a local level, county, state. And there was ultimately the conversation of the biggest issue with being able to fund these kinds of programs around housing and issues around being able to build, community-owned economies around agriculture, you name it, is that people don't have control over how their city budgets are spent. And so we are working towards, in Birmingham, which we want to support anyone else who lives in another municipality, essentially be able to use this model. But we want to pass something called participatory budgeting, which literally just means that either a percentage or in some cases, that's been an entire budget. Instead of it kind of being passed in Birmingham by the 10 elected officials, and that's it, in a city of over 200,000 people, that residents themselves can create their own proposals and vote directly on which proposals are their priorities to make sure that the budget funds those. So that way, if you want your park to be fixed up or you want to build a community-owned farm, you can vote directly for that and maybe not vote to support, say, more corporate subsidies. So these are the kinds of conversations that we're having, and there'll be both a lot of canvassing opportunities where folks can help us go door to door or phone bank, or other things along those lines to support this work.
I think that's fantastic. I've always been fascinated by the idea of the participatory budgeting, and I think a lot of times folks in political spaces do get so wrapped up in national politics that we neglect how important it is to start local. And I think that's one of those areas where there's a lot of really cool things that can be done. And then you link that up with movements to grow co-ops and to grow community land trust and community-owned farms. And suddenly, you are building a more democratic, cooperatively owned and operated type of economy in your area. And I think that should be one of our goals looking ahead, especially given the challenges that we're going to be facing. I mean, we already are facing multiple layers of crisis in this state, and it's only going to get worse given the state of the climate. So I think these sort of projects to grow wealth from the bottom up, to grow people power, and to build resiliency in our communities, it's right on time. It's right on time. So really appreciate what y'all are doing in Birmingham, and I think you're right. Hopefully, some other folks in other cities across Alabama will be able to watch what you guys are doing and maybe take some inspiration there, because in Huntsville, for example, it's 6 elected officials for a city that is now technically bigger than Birmingham, apparently.
Yes.
I know the metro area is definitely bigger in Birmingham, but so Huntsville's growing, and 5 city councilors and a mayor are making the determination on a pretty massive budget. And we've talked at length on this show about some of the issues with the Huntsville Police Department, and I know you can go to any city and find similar type issues, but it's a budget's a reflection of priorities.
Absolutely.
And to me, that would start with the actual participation in the budget itself. If people's voices are not heard in the process, how can we expect the outcome to reflect, the people's interests? So I think that's intriguing, and I love that y'all are doing that.
I'll end that with this one point that based on what you just said, which is our most recent canvassing that we were doing this year. That the stat was that folks only felt like the budget was 42% equitable. in the city of Birmingham. That's a pretty pretty bad stat right there. And there's no effort to address that. So,
it's interesting you bring that up because, one of the other segments I'm recording this week is on the political engagement in Alabama and the extremely low political engagement according to all these various metrics. But then you go talk to people face to face, and less than half of them feel like the budget is at all equitable. I mean, you start to see why there is this disengagement, right? And participatory budgeting is one way for folks to be engaged in the community and have a little bit more of a say-so in the wealth of their community that they all contribute to. We all do. So I did want to switch gears with the last little bit of this conversation, because I know that you were at the Troublemaker School in Montevallo in October. So most of y'all who are listening probably remember Labor Notes did hold a training called the Alabama Troublemaker School, October, and held that in Montevallo. We had over 120 folks show up, including some folks from a couple of different states. Quite a number of unions and organizations were represented. And Rob, you were there, and you're coming at it from a little bit different angle than maybe some of the more traditional, union members in attendance. So that's why I was curious to know, what did you think about the event, and what were some of your takeaways, not just from the event, but also from the audience?
Absolutely. Well, I think my first thought is recognizing also that this is the first of its kind in Alabama. There's been a lot of great organizing going on in the state the last, decade. Obviously, in the labor realm, in the last 2 years in particular, we still have 2 different unions on strike in Alabama, that doesn't even include everything happening at Amazon, which of course is another big name one going on in that space.
Right.
So I think to me, my first takeaway is that it is a sign of how the movement is building and growing in strength in Alabama. As you mentioned, it had amazing participation, especially for a first event, and how many different sections of the movement were brought together. And I think ultimately that ability for us to come together in that collective way to discuss, to build relationships, which is a crucial one, and to strategize is what it's going to take for us to build a mass movement necessary. This is Alabama. Like, we have a very long storied history of being able to build mass movements. And on a national scale, I feel like the South is often ignored very heavily for its contributions to building mass movements in this country. I mean, the union movement started in the South and in Appalachia, and we're not credited for that. I think us being able to come together to rebuild those relationships across different sections of the movement is what it's going to take to build that power. And I think we definitely succeeded on that, from union organizers to rank and file members to immigrant rights groups to socialists and environmentalists. We really had a large swath of folks there. And I think that we're only having discussions about how we can build off of those relationships moving forward. On a personal level, I also think personally, I learned some cool additional nuances about union contracts. And I think honestly, it was during the training that you led where we were discussing some nuances around union contracts and some of the organizing that goes on, in between contract negotiations to push for more concessions. And I found that really interesting, and it really helped me kind of envision some of that a little bit differently in a positive manner.
Right.
So it's definitely whenever we do more trainings along these lines in the future. I think this is a huge resource that folks should come to.
Yeah, and well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad you had those takeaways. And I really agree with you about the South and the way we're often neglected in the national political scene, the way we're often written off. Yes, it's a fact that our governments are dominated by reactionaries. Nobody knows that better than we do. We have to live under them, right? and that goes to your point that we have always been at the forefront of building mass movements in this country, because we haven't had a choice. And often we're dealing with issues of oppression and exploitation here before other folks are. Sometimes we're the testing ground, or however you want to look at it. So, yeah, I think it is remarkable to see a gathering of any sort in a place like Alabama, like that does have that diversity of what I'm just going to call like the people's movement broadly, from labor to environment to social justice. And I think you're right. I think the more we put our heads together, the more problems we can solve, and the more folks we can bring along. Because I'm sure for every one person that was there were two or three that would have been interested in being there. Suddenly you start doing the math, you're looking at a few hundred. You're like, wait a second, we've got a few hundred pretty dedicated activist types in the state of Alabama. What could we do if we all are coordinating and growing our networks? Because we all know some folks, and you start growing that. And I think, to me, knowing that there are folks out there like you, folks like the folks in your organization doing the kind of work you're doing, happening all over Alabama, and that's been one of the greatest things about doing this show, is learning more of this and learning who is out there, what kind of good work is already being done, and trying to lift up that work. Because to me, that's what it's all about. If we're all pulling in the same direction, if we're all contributing the way we can contribute, we can really make a difference. So, Rob, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the work you're doing. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure we talked about today, or maybe any plugs you had to get out today?
I don't think I have any specific plugs.
Okay.
Now.
But you did have a couple of really interesting opportunities for folks to be getting involved in the year ahead, in terms of canvassing and in terms of getting involved with the home retrofitting. So for those of you who are in the Birmingham area, especially, if you're looking for a way to get involved, both of those sound like really great projects.
Absolutely. And I'm just looking forward to continuing these conversations and building these coalitions, because I really makes me think of, speaking of that Southern history of cross collaboration between different aspects of the movement. It just makes me think of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, and that bringing together the civil rights movement, the union movement, and even anti-war movements, and that's when change really starts to shift. And I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us to get to that point, but we've finally turned that corner to get there, to move in that direction. And I think now's the time. If folks have been on the fence about getting involved in organizing, now's the time to do it.
Hell yeah. I think that's a great place to end. Thanks again, Rob Burton. Appreciate all your time today. Check them out, y'all. Sweet Alabama. You've been listening to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks again for your time, everybody. Time for a little labor history, y'all. Let's take a few minutes to share some of the December anniversaries in labor history, as well as important days from a social justice perspective. I compiled this information primarily from the 2022-23 edition of Planning to Change the World, a plan book for social justice educators. This excellent planner is published by the Education for Liberation Network, and I wanted to make sure I gave them full credit. And of course, shout out to the Zen Education Project, which was also a key source. So let's get started.
December 1st is World AIDS Day. The United Nations has designated this day to honor AIDS victims, focus attention on issues surrounding HIV/AIDS, and organize anti-discrimination activities. We know how class and income significantly impact health outcomes. Love and solidarity to all of our fellow workers out there struggling with this disease and who have impacted loved ones. December 3rd is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Launched by the UN in 1992, International Day of Persons with Disabilities aims to promote an understanding of issues faced by people with disabilities with a view toward ensuring the dignity, rights, and well-being of this often marginalized group. December 3rd is also the 40th anniversary of the UN World Program of Action Concerning the Disabled. The UN General Assembly passed Resolution 3752, creating the World Program of Action Concerning the Disabled, which aimed to create a global strategy to equalize opportunities for full participation of people with disabilities in social life and national development. A key element is the call to view disability rights as part and parcel to basic human rights. We obviously still have a lot of work to do. December 5th is the 80th anniversary of the Manzanar Uprising, which was one of the most significant acts of resistance in the Japanese internment camps. Tensions were already high in the camp because of mistreatment by the guards and suspected corruption among the administrators. Thousands of prisoners protested after one prisoner was arrested in the beating of another prisoner believed to be informing to the administration. 2 people were killed and several others were injured when guards fired on the protesters. While maybe not considered traditional labor history, the internment of Japanese Americans is part of American history we should never forget. December 10th is International Human Rights Day, celebrating the UN's adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, among other things, says, quote, "Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests." December 18th is International Migrants Day. There are an estimated 200 million migrant workers in the world. The UN marks this date to recognize this diverse group of workers and the economic, social, and political contexts that affect their rights and livelihoods. This year's World Cup is just the latest international spectacle built on the blood and sweat of migrant labor. December 18th also marks the 50th anniversary of the Christmas bombing campaign of Vietnam. Toward the end of the Vietnam War, President Richard Nixon ordered a massive bombing of Hanoi and other cities. This 11-day campaign, known as Operation Linebacker 2, killed more than 1,500 Vietnamese civilians. It's still unclear whether the bombings actually had any effect on the timeline of the end of the war. So many lives ruined by such a terrible conflict. In the labor movement, we know that immigrants have long been used as scapegoats, with politicians hoping to rile up nativist sentiments to distract and redirect working class outrage. December 24th is the 70th anniversary of the McCarran-Walter Act. This act reinforced the racist national origins quota system established by the Immigration Act of 1924. Annual quotas were set at 1/6 of 1% of each nationality's population in the U.S. in 1920, ensuring almost all available visas went to Northern or Western Europeans. While the new law reversed policies preventing immigration from Asia, it imposed a 100 visa annual limit for every Asian country, ensuring Asians would remain a tiny proportion of new immigrants. Just one chapter in a long story of immigration struggles, with politicians deciding who gets an open door and who gets shut out. While 101 years is an odd anniversary, I did want to mention Christmas Day 1921, when the great labor leader, socialist icon, and in my opinion, true American hero, Eugene Victor Debs was released from prison. Sentenced to prison by the Woodrow Wilson administration for speaking out against World War I, his sentence was finally commuted more than 3 years after the end of the conflict by President Warren G. Harding. A good reminder of the ways free speech has never really been free in this country, the retaliation that has been directed at so many change makers throughout our history, and the remarkable resolve demonstrated by organizers dedicated to building a better world. December 28th is the 110th anniversary of the first publicly owned mass transit system in the U.S. The San Francisco Municipal Railway was the first publicly owned and operated transportation system in a major American city. The government-owned system was strongly supported by the public after years of enduring for-profit monopolies that arbitrarily raised fares and mistreated workers. A bond proposal was overwhelmingly passed in 1909 to pay for the system. Other cities, such as Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, offered public transportation, but they were operated by private companies. And finally, we recognize that December is full of holy days for many of the world's religions. Whatever you do or don't celebrate, we sincerely wish all of our listeners a happy holiday season. All right, folks, you're listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio show, where we bring you news, commentary, and analysis by and for the Southern working class. I wanted to take a moment to note the recent passing of two legends among labor circles, Stoughton Lynn and Mike Davis. Mike Davis passed away in October at the age of 76. In The Nation, John Weiner called Mike Davis, quote, a brilliant radical reporter with a novelist's eye and a historian's memory. Lois Beckett in The Guardian wrote, quote, in more than a dozen books, Davis exposed the power struggles and betrayals that shaped the landscape and the people of Southern California, where he grew up, and also explored how similar power struggles between elites and working class people played out around the world. His unsparing political analysis earned him the nickname the Prophet of Doom, a title he disliked. But his idealism, insight, and flair for storytelling also made him an inspiration for generations of leftist writers and activists. I first heard of Stoughton Lynn when I attended my first IWW meeting and was recommended his book, Labor Law for the Rank and Filer. Zen Education Project wrote a lovely tribute, which I'm going to quote at length. People's historian Stoughton Lynn died on November 17th after an extraordinary life as a conscientious objector, peace and civil rights activist, tax resistor, professor, author, and lawyer. Lynn inspired us with his role as a people's historian, always working in solidarity with struggles for justice today. Lynn served as director of the Freedom Schools in the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project. He worked with prisoners and challenged the prison industrial complex. While teaching at Spelman College, his family and Howard Zinn's developed a lifelong friendship. Zinn said of Lynn, quote, he's an exemplar of strength and gentleness in the quest for a better world. Among Lynn's many books is Doing History from the Bottom Up, in which he described the three key perspectives that are guides for any teacher or student of history. 1. History from below is not or should not be mere description of hitherto invisible poor and oppressed people. It should challenge mainstream versions of the past. 2. The United States was founded on crimes against humanity directed at Native Americans and enslaved African Americans. 3. Participants in making history should be regarded not only as sources of facts, but as colleagues in interpreting what happened. After Freedom Summer, Lynn got involved in anti-Vietnam War organizing. Despite his talents as a scholar, academia closed their doors to him after he traveled on a fact-finding mission to Hanoi. In a memorial tribute to Howard Zinn at the Organization of American Historians, Lynn said, quote, when a comrade dies in the struggle for nonviolent revolution, we try to pick up his dreams. May we all do that now, pick up Lynn's dreams and his principled, grassroots approach to making those dreams a reality.